Hello everyone, welcome to another topic of Phonology class. The topic for this video is about vowel phonemes. The first thing we're going to discuss is establishing the vowel contrast. With the first part is the minimal pair. Look at the table on the right. Here is the minimal pair list for standard Southern British English. The list on the right provides evidence for almost all phonemically contrasted vowels of standard Southern British English, with a very small number of exceptions. The list of minimal pairs on the right are suitable when our goal is the establishment of a phoneme system for a single accent. But they may not be the best option when different accents are being compared. The second establishing vowel contrast is by establishing the lexical set. An alternative to use a system introduced by John Wells involving standard lexical sets. The keyword for each standard lexical set appears conventionally in capital letters and is shorthand for a whole list of other words sharing the same vowel. Although the precise vowel they do share may vary from accent to accent. These lexical sets allow comparison between accents to be made much more straightforwardly. So, you see in the table there are 4 columns. The first column is SSBE, the Standard Southern British English accent, and the second column is the GA, General American accent, and set number, and the last column is for the keyword. We can now ask which vowel speakers of a particular accent have in the kit set number, or whether they have the same vowel in the word north and forth as the standard Southern British English does, or they come in 2 different vowels as in General American does. We could add that many speakers of Northern English will have U in struth as well as food, and R in part as well as straw. Pinpointing 2 of the differences most commonly noted between North and South. The point of the standard lexical set is not to show that oppositions exist in all these contexts. Instead, the aim is to allow differences between accents, and sometimes between speakers of the same accent, perhaps they are in the different generations, to be pinpointed and discussed. In fact, there may be no accents of English which contrast 27 phonemically different vowels in the 27 lexical sets, or even 24 for the stressed vowels. Standard Scottish English, or SSE, is the Scottish equivalent for SSBE, a relatively unlocalized, socially prestigious accent. Many middle-class Scots have SSE as a native variety. Many others use it in formal situations, and it's widely heard in the media, in education, and in the Scottish Parliament. It's to be contrasted with Scots, sometimes called Broad Scots, a divergent range of non-standard Scottish dialects, which differ from Standard English, not only in phonetics and phonology, but also in vocabulary and grammar. The final example is New Zealand English, or NZE, a relatively recent variety which shares some characteristic with the other extraterritorial English spoken in Australia and South Africa. But also it has some distinctive characteristics of its own, notably the fact that schwa appears in stressed position. On one hand, phonologists may wish phonemes to be fairly concrete, reflecting quite closely what speakers actually do, in at least some of their everyday pronunciations. It follows that there will be significant symbol differences between the vowel systems of different accents. But on the other hand, some phonologists feel it's more important to reflect the fact that English is a single language, and believe that speakers must have common mental representations to allow them to understand one another, even if they speak rather different accents. Well, in that case, common phoneme symbols might be chosen. The second solution has the advantage that it stresses the common features speakers of English might share, at least in terms of mental representations, although they may sound very different in actual conversation. It therefore maintains a strong difference between abstract phonology and concrete phonetics, meaning that phonemes potentially have very different realizations, and the same realization can belong to different phonemes in different accents. At this point, we don't know enough about how speakers store and process their language mentally to prove which is the most appropriate solution. But it's worth asking how speakers would learn a very abstract system, which doesn't revert the phonetic qualities they hear around them during language acquisition. Moving on to vowel features and allophonic rules. To distinguish English vowels appropriately, we require the features for the dimension of tongue height such as high and mid, and we use the feature front and back for place of articulation and round. All those features can distinguish 4 contrastive degrees of vowel height and 3 degrees of roundness, which allows all varieties of English to be described. In Standard Southern British English and in General American, the former in each pair is typically long, and the latter short. And long vowels are also articulated more extremely, or more peripherally than corresponding short ones. The long high front vowel is higher and fronted than the short high front vowel, while the long high back vowel is higher and backer than the short counterpart. The question is whether we regard this as primarily a quality or a quantity difference. If we take quality as primary, we can regard E, U, A, O as tense, or more peripheral, and simply write a redundancy rule to say that all tense vowels are phonetically long. But on the other hand, we could do the opposite, and take length as the important factor. So these vowels are long, E, U, A, and O, and redundantly also more peripheral. For most accents of English, we could choose either solution, although most phonologists would select either length or tenseness as relevant at the phoneme level, with the other simply following automatically, to minimize the redundancy in the system. In Standard Scottish English and Scots, then, we can define the 2 classes of phonemic vowels as length, or the 3 which never lengthen and tense, as the others, which are sometimes long and sometimes short, in predictably different environments. It's possible to predict length from tense, but not the other way around. The allophonic rule involved will then state that tense vowels lengthen before R, before a voice fricative, or before a word boundary, that is in word final position. Other allophonic rules are more general. For instance, in all varieties of English, vowels become nasalized immediately before nasal consonants. The phlegm lowers in anticipation of the forthcoming nasal and allows air to flow through the nasal as well as the oral cavity during the production of the vowel. Just as for the consonants, then some allophonic rules specifying the realizations of vowel phonemes are found very generally in English, reflecting universal phonetic tendencies. Others, like the Scottish vowel length rule, are peculiar to certain accents. Next, we have phonetic similarity and defective distribution. Phonetic similarity can help us decide which vowel allophones to assign to which phoneme, while defective distributions hinder our decision-making. For instance, schwa in accents other than New Zealand English is confined to unstressed positions, and therefore does a strictly speaking contrast with most other vowels. Its defective distributions means it could be regarded as the unstressed allophone of almost any other vowel phoneme. So, schwa appears in the unstressed syllables of about, father, pattern, sherbet, temples. But which vowel phoneme is involved in each case? Since speakers don't tend to produce vowels other than schwa in any of these forms, even when speaking rather carefully, it's difficult to say. We can say that there's wholesale neutralization of vowel phonemes in unstressed syllables. Alternatively, because speakers of English can hear the difference between schwa and other vowels quite reliably, and seem to regard schwa as a distinct vowel. The best solution might be to accept that schwa is a phoneme of English in its own right, albeit with a defective distribution. Again, as with consonants, defective distributions often result from language change, For instance, spelling evidence from Old English indicates that a much wider range of vowels was probably found in unstressed syllables at that period. These have gradually merged into schwa during the history of English. As for phonetic similarity, it will again help to resolve situations where one allophone could potentially belong to more than one phoneme. Although phonologists and native speakers apply this criterion so automatically as to scarcely justify making it an explicit step in phonemic analysis. Moving to another topic is about proliferation, naturalization, and morphophonemics. Proliferation occurs between allophones of a single phoneme. This again correlates with sociolinguistic rather than linguistic conditioning. Some cases of proliferation reflect language change in progress. In standard Southern British English, older speakers may still produce centering diphthongs in the word queue and square word, while younger ones almost invariably smooth these diphthongs out and produce monophthong of o and a. Younger speakers might use the pronunciation more typical of the older generation when they're talking to other relatives or their informal circumstances. Cases of naturalization tend not to be the subject of sociolinguistic influence in this way, but rather reflect a tendency for certain otherwise contrastive sets or pairs of vowels to fall together, with a single realization in a particular phonological context. However, where a suspension of contrast takes place in a particular phonological context and will affect all lexical items with that context, in other cases we're dealing with an interaction of morphology and phonology, here we can't invoke naturalizations. These vowel shift alternations involve pairs of phonemes which very clearly contrast in English. It's so called because the patterns reflect the operation of sound change called the Great Vowel Shift several hundred years ago. Minimal pairs are common for all of these: take type and tape, peep and pass, lake and lack for instance. However, the presence of each member of these pairs can be predicted in certain contexts only, and native speakers tend to regard the pairs involved, such as divine and divinity, as related forms of the same word. This is a naturalization because the context involved is not specifically phonetic or phonological, it's merely morphological. That what matters is not the length of the word or the segment following the vowel in question, but the presence or absence of one of the particular set of suffixes. Morphophonemics is the interaction between phonology and morphology. To put it another way, not all alternations involving morphology are completely productive. The fact that teach has the past tense thought is an idiosyncrasy of modern English, which has to be mastered. But although knowing this relationship will help a learner of English to use teach and thought appropriately, it won't help when it comes to learning other verbs, such as preach. It doesn't have the past tense of taught, and caught doesn't have the present tense of teach. Knowing where we should draw the line between extremely regular cases, which clearly involve exemptionless rules or generalizations, very irregular ones which may be stated as rules with exceptions, and one-off or several-off cases where there is no rule at all, but a good deal of rote learning, is one of the major challenges of morphophonology. The only comfort is that native speakers, at least during acquisition and sometimes later too, find it just as much of a challenge as amply demonstrated by overgeneralization. For example, in the past tense of swang from swing, it's the same pattern of swim and swam, or the past tense thread from thread is as the same pattern of meet and met.